Hey guys, I'm back with the sixth part with Kasra. We're already right in the middle of getting into the rocker scene and the red light district. The scene is on still at the same time.
What do you mean, yes?
You also have to finance life in Kiel and Legion 81.
Yeah, sure, that's running in parallel.
So,
That all matches together, it fits in
is Nightlife.
all the scene. And I also moved a woman to the club, to the coast, into the Eros, and it all matched so well because it was the same lifestyle.
I'll jump back in with a question. Kasra defines himself through group, violence, and appearances.
At that point, yes, the group didn't exist before. It was just appearances, violence, and status economically. Now the group is added, and from the moment we're starting now, from Legion 81, that's when it was.
To have given up or lost his group life. What does that mean for you, for Kasra now? To be insulted, I'll just say it, by any random person on the internet? People talk for someone who all his life was very focused on this is who I am. I can only do this. If you mess with me, I have to be respected. Now, any random person at the keyboard has a Rambo button and can say whatever they want. That's a Rambo button. Yeah, so anyone can do that, Mr. John.
Be Rambo.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, by now I'm free from those things. I'm completely above that. True, as I said, I think we've already talked about this in our conversation here pretty much at the beginning. Those are people who have no clue what they're discussing. They sit behind their PC or their laptop or tablet or whatever, and they think they have to express their opinion about everything, as I said.
Well, hate is not an opinion.
Hate is not an opinion, exactly. And neither is defamation, of course. And that's why I think these people are very dissatisfied with themselves and just reflect their hate and negativity onto others and just have to let it out somehow without even realizing that they themselves are totally dissatisfied with themselves. As I mentioned, I'm nearly 40 now, so that doesn't impact me. I'm above all that. I've experienced a lot in my life, both positive and negative. I've gained a lot of life experience and understanding of people over the years, so I know how people tick. I have a very selective circle around me, and I don't let the internet get too close to me either. Initially, I read some comments here and there, but as I said, that's just mental cognitive inability. So why should I react to every little stick and crumb? Yes,
You don't have to do everything people expect of you.
that's how it is. I only care about the opinions of those who matter to me, not the rest.
It's crucial for others to listen to that. I always say only those who know me well can judge me. My family, my friends, but just someone who read something on the internet,
Or saw something.
they shouldn't form a complete opinion yet. And as I said, you can't always easily walk in someone else's shoes.
Most of the time, they don't even fit the other person.
They saw potential in you. Legion 81, your president, is a very well-known story. There are still some overlaps with us, but only distantly, because we were friends with the Hells Angels from Southport. Would you like to briefly tell the story of the president of Region 81?
Yes, that was Steffen back then. Also a very flamboyant, I'd like to say dazzling, flamboyant personality. I didn't know anything about him, just like with many others, but even the people on site knew very, very little about him. He suddenly showed up in the region and took off economically in a certain way. Was partnered with the vice president, Paul and Peter, back then. At that time, I was number 2 in Kiel, and they had a kind of social furniture store there.
Set up, part.
Shipped to Bulgaria with his wife, truckloads once a month. The guys had to help, not me too sometimes, and what the club did was here and there, he was very active, and then there was forced prostitution and abuse in a room like that, and then he was arrested and decided to cooperate while in custody and to testify, and then he made a lot of statements about many people. Among other things, one of the most serious of the crimes and the accusation was a murder. He said that one or two Hamburg Hells Angels from Southport back then, and also some Kiel Hells Angels, had somehow given a murder contract. Among others, also Frank Hanebut, that was his statement. Very, very important. They would have also given a murder contract. They would have killed him.
A Turk, right?
A Turk who had been missing for years until today. We would have buried him in a warehouse.
I believe it's in a tattoo supply warehouse.
Yeah, somewhere in a warehouse. Two men were involved. One committed the murder on the orders of the other. Afterward, they scattered. And there was one of the biggest raids in Kiel, in the entire history of Kiel. And they turned everything upside down there, and then
The man.
also arrests, pre-trial detention. They also arrested people. It was a very, very serious matter. This was no joke. And they believed the man a lot. The authorities, of course, told him at first, okay, murder and so on. Now we're going to take action here. And they followed through, and for some people things changed pretty quickly, although...
I have to say, he claimed that he's lying under the hall. He was buried there, concreted in. Then the hall was dismantled. Exactly, that's what I wanted to talk about now. Exactly, that's what I wanted to
talk about. They made a huge fuss and then dismantled the entire hall where this victim was allegedly buried, supposedly concreted in. They also destroyed everything, dug there, and found nothing. Nothing was detected, not even a cadaver search dog. There was nothing, really nothing at all. Nothing was confirmed in any way. And that's how I found out about it, and people were also arrested and were supposed to be charged. And later it turned out that the man was not a law-abiding citizen, and not only that he had a criminal record, that's one thing fine, but that he had already told a similar story at his old place of origin. But there it wasn't a hall, no concrete, instead it was a lake. And there they pumped out the entire lake. And back then, a prosecutor who was working on the case also got in touch and said, guys, be careful with this one. It's actually similar or basically the same story. It's just that in this case, it's a lake and not a hall, and not a lake like ours, so be careful. And then somehow it still got overlooked, and just like it sometimes happens with authorities. A lot of people, a lot of heads, some things don't get passed on. They get dropped or blocked, whatever. I can't comment on what the reason was. In any case, they made a big fuss about it and really went all out, the authorities, and later it all came to nothing. There was a Grenzschutzgruppe 9 operation at Frank Hanebut's place in Hanover, where they shot the dogs. And that was no small thing. And yes, and later it turned out that it was all nothing. Nothing fit, nothing was right, just like it was before in his story, in his original place or hometown where he was. And
I have to say this clearly, I'm not without criticism towards the police either. Sometimes I think there is also an overzealousness in investigations. You know, sometimes things happen too quickly, like bait being thrown out, and then someone like Steffen R. knows, well, I know.
I don't know if you can call that anger. Because for that, you probably would have to have been there. There has to be some kind of emotional connection. I think what was said is that it always depends on who is leading the investigation, that the prosecutor, the district attorney makes the decisions. Yes, also which measures are taken, motions are filed, search warrants are signed by judges, or not. So that's already the case. I think they're already obligated to do that by virtue of their office. To go in there, especially when murder is involved. But I think in this case, unfortunately, people acted in good faith. I'll just call it that. You could also call it investigative zeal. I just think that people approached the whole thing very naively, thinking they were dealing with a criminal organization, people who had devoted themselves to a life of crime, and assumed it would all fit together.
Well, maybe that was phrased incorrectly, you know, but maybe it was more like, oh God, now we're going to get the Kila, you know, so before we...
They knew it, or as I said, they are officially obligated to start an investigation. Aside from that, they can't just ignore it and say, oh no, we don't believe it. They are required to start an investigation in the case of such an offense, especially when it comes to a capital crime. And that's why I think, but that just fueled things further, and I think they just approached it naively. The man can present himself well. I met him. He's always been a charismatic person, even back when I met him, always, during the months I had dealings with him. Unfortunately, really got dragged down with it, which of course was extremely difficult and also affected the credibility a bit. Also then just
3 presidents were reportedly arrested. Money was allegedly involved.
Things were confiscated and they dismantled the whole, resulting in millions in damages, which was an economic factor. Millions in damages, I don't know if they have to pay compensation for that, I think so, but something like that is also a process. Then there are lawsuits, then there are complaints, then you appeal. That easily takes 5, 6, 7 years of litigation before you really get to the bottom of it. So from that perspective, it wasn't a good thing, regardless of whether you like these people or not. But we live in a state governed by the rule of law.
So from that perspective,
you have to keep things in perspective and say, okay, it just didn't go well for everyone. I don't think anyone came out of this as a winner. And in the end, the dead person wasn't found, nor was it confirmed that he was dead. So, yeah, to say nothing ventured, nothing gained would be cynical, but in the end, there were only losers. The only winner was the person who made those claims and recklessly played with other people's lives, because one thing is clear. When you sit somewhere and make claims, it always has consequences for someone. And if I just claim something that's not true, and then such drastic things happen to that person, even though they haven't done anything wrong, and the person making the claim knows that, you have to be really, really cold-blooded just to gain an advantage for yourself. That's really, really devious and also very malicious. And the man knew that it wasn't true and also talked about situations, torture chair, he was tortured. It's extremely far-fetched, which doesn't mean it can't happen, but in this case I also believe it didn't. The people from Kiel whom I got to know were simply too cautious and careful for that. So they wouldn't just sit there, even if, let's say, they were cheering for the club, which I could definitely imagine, let's say. So basically, the club wants that too, that's why there's the award, murder attempted or whatever. But that they make it so transparent, like a little light.
yes, it's even like that.
So far from life.
And not
realistic. That's why you would have had to, it doesn't make sense. The guy has only been a supporter for a few months, barely knows the people. Now suddenly a story comes up and he suddenly knows about one of the most well-known Hells Angels, influential Frank Hanebutt murder, the Kielites Angels. The police also know how they operate. Very closed structure, very non-transparent, even towards their own people. Even within the structure, only 1 or 2 people know things that the others don't. And then some small fry within the hierarchy suddenly knows every little detail. That's already suspicious. It was not just suspicious, but extremely devious and malicious, causing significant harm to many people.
An incident like that led one of the Hamburg presidents to resign from their position. He did come back in again, but I think that was one of the...
That could be.
You know,
Do you know what happened to him, to Steffen R? No, he got prison time. Got a sentence reduction, as far as I know. He's probably living his life somewhere, I have no idea. I never saw him again after his arrest. He was a red flag after that, and from my previous pest video, because talking to the police was not an option. And I got out of there too, and it was a really wild story, yeah.
And how did things go for you after that? So then the Legion 81 was dissolved, police pressure, they said the crew was done.
Not at all.
Cause trouble, otherwise you'll be broken up or crushed or put under pressure. Making money gets harder, and yet you still stayed in Kiel?
Exactly, it was like this. The Hells Angels said, we want to recruit those who have potential. We want to recruit them as potential Hells Angels and see how things go from there, and whether it can even continue, and the rest should go their own way. We have none, and the patches were collected and all that, and back then I had a very, very well-disposed and supportive vice president at the Hells Angels. That was Poland Peter at the time. He was one of the first I met and also one of the last I saw there.
May I ask a question? Were you sure, like, yeah, of course I have the potential to become a Hells Angel here?
It was already, Kiel was a tough place, that was clear to me, I already said that earlier. Kiel was always very, well, now it's ending in Kiel, it was very far away. I think I wouldn't have made it either, not because I was an idiot or anything, but first, I was too wild, I was too hungry, they didn't even know that, and Dirk told me that too, the president told me that back then, Dirk. Also, I wasn't on the same economic level at all. Back then it was really good, you needed a 5-figure entry fee, that was the standard, regular. Large payments that might have seemed relatively small to you, but for me, despite my good earnings in the red light business, they were still very significant. Despite that, the prices were extremely high, and I didn't fit in age-wise. The average age was around 45 plus while I was in my early 20s. There were no shared topics, but that doesn't imply that you were a low achiever. It just didn't fit.
And that's what.
They saw it the same way. Then there was a conversation. I was summoned to the coast. Then I spoke with the president at the time from Kiel Dirk, and he said, "Listen, my boy, I like you. You've proven yourself here and there. You showed me in a situation that you stood up for me." There was a big police raid, and the police acted pretty rough, and I stood in front of them. Then I kind of escorted him out to protect him, and then got into an argument with the police, pushed them aside a bit so that he had a clear path and could leave without anything happening to him and without being identified or arrested. And also about this whole situation.
It's also an exposing situation. And
especially for him, back then, he was also a very high-ranking person, and he didn't want to sit somewhere on the curb in handcuffs and then have a photographer come by. He expressed his gratitude directly and through others, telling me, "Listen, sometimes you don't consider where or whether you should hit like that. I get it. I was young once too. It may not fit with us, but that doesn't mean you're bad or can't succeed. You're a good guy. You make your money. You're loyal. I mean, loyal to him. And he believes it doesn't fit because it's financially challenging for you. When he says you're different types of people, but he doesn't want you out of the structure. He wants you to go your own way while keeping the door open so you can try your luck elsewhere and still have a chance. Better one than none at all." Only 2 remained, and one had already bid farewell in the second conversation due to a neck issue. From their point of view. "Listen, a new charter is being formed in Hamburg that includes migrants like you. Around your age, average age, and they're all working in similar professions. Mainly in the professions you work in. I'll have a word with the president. I know him pretty well. Then you'll go over there and see if it works for you. See if it fits." I said, "All right, sounds good." And back then, I already had a bit of contact in Berlin as well. Due to this supporter thing, we went to Berlin but didn't discuss it much. Kadir back then was also one of the most dazzling charters ever. Well, dazzling, one of the most sensational charters ever because of the patchover from the Bandidos to the Hells Angels. We can discuss that separately, but it's an important point. And
you already had contact also with Kadir?
Yes, we were in Berlin with them. There was also the Germany meeting in Kiel in 2009 or 2010. But not in a way that you would say, "I want to go there now" or something. But you did look over there like, wow, those guys and so on. They got a lot of media attention, and they did things too. Made it happen. We accomplished it on our own, driven by our desire, and achieved what no one else in Germany had done before. I went to Hamburg and ended up on Süderstrasse. I
have to say, in Hamburg there are 2 Helsings charters. One of them is banned.
One is banned, but the people are still there. There's another place, and they also have another place on the Reeperbahn. Back then, it was called the original Harbor City. I don't know if it still exists in that form. Very long established, only native German members, very old school, and even further away from me than Kiel in terms of the setup. And he said to me, "Listen, Habos' Southport was called,
back then the
charter is being newly founded, that's so-and-so, and there are people, guys, your type. Could be a fit, they're on your level, just like you. I'll talk to him about it, and then you can try your way there." So I'll do it, yeah. And then I went there, and I think I've already said I pretty much avoided Hamburg. The pimps were totally avoided. I had my women in apartments here and there, always a bit stingy too, but I didn't want to have anything to do with them because it just didn't fit. I didn't like the people. It's like a village. Even though it's a big city, it can still be like a village, and it's always the same people, acquaintances, and I just didn't feel like dealing with those people because they were a very specific type, real pimps. They handled things differently than I did, and it just didn't fit, and I wanted to do my own thing. But then suddenly they were there. They were like executives. Adari back then, and a few others, Philip, who was the president at the time, Carl, and all the others. Also including well-known figures from the scene, and also
well-known Hells.
Angels, well-known Hells Angels, and various supporters, prospective names. I can't remember them all right now. Then I came and saw who was there. I immediately noticed, I'm the president back then, Philip, we just can't stand each other. He didn't like me, I didn't like him, a really difficult personality, and the people who were there didn't fit either. I wasn't interested, but I still went there 2 or 3 times, back and forth for about 3 weeks. It just didn't work out. Then I had a little argument with someone, Elvis, who also left back then.
Yeah, it just didn't work out.
Yeah, somewhere between complete disaster and dead. Their lifestyle was very unusual and strange. They had a completely different approach to running the charter as well.
Of course, it's also different when you're in such an old
Charter first.
takes a look in Kiel or something, and then maybe in such a new offer, I would.
Shaped differently, I had a completely different image in mind of how something like this works, despite the few insights I had. The ones I had were significantly different from the ones I found there.
Because I think the connection we had, we were very good friends with the Charter Southport. That was our contact to
Hamburg, and later also with Berlin City, but differently, but we'll get to that.
But you could tell right from the start over there.
The thing is, the women there just didn't like me, and I didn't like them either. That was clear, of course. You can tell how people approach you, and especially the president. He made some really strange moves. It just didn't work out. The only one I got along with was Reason, back then a huge former member from there, also known from newspapers and television. He's been missing since 2017. A former Hells Angels Turkey Nomads member has gone missing, and his whereabouts are unknown. Has happened. Back then, he was also a prospect and applicant, and I got along with him very well. In the Hells Angels context, he was always very important. A communicative, calm, sociable person. Guy, so he liked me too. We spent a lot of time together. I was with him in Bremen at his uncle's place. We were in Hamburg at a store, acquaintance of his, eating. He picked me up, and then we spent time together. So those 3 or 4 weeks, and we stayed in touch until the last day of my membership. And he was the only one. And then he came to me, one evening he came to me and said, "Hey, let's meet up, man. I was living in Bamberg. Let's meet up. We need to talk." During that phase, he asked me to come downstairs. I inquired about what was happening. He told me to put my phone away, which I did, wondering what was going on. He said people called him Persa, a nickname he got in Kiel because Kasra was too difficult for others to pronounce.
You know,
there are always nicknames in this scene.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think Kasra is particularly nice.
Yeah, but you know how Kasra can be for some people. So you know how it is.
For sure.
That's how I got the nickname. He says to Persa, "Hey, we need to talk, but it's confidential." I said, "Of course, do that as soon as possible. Distance yourself from Southport and try to find somewhere else to stay." I said, "Yeah." I asked what was going on. He said the guys were talking very badly about me there. I don't know why. I attended meetings and talked to this person and that person. I heard about it. You won't be happy there. They'll make your life difficult, burn you out, and you'll never find your way. And there was no reason why.
What?
Is that disappointing to hear? You're right, it's give and take. I didn't like him anyway. And I knew from the start that I didn't want it myself. But he meant well, was honest and sincere. He also said to just leave it at that. Don't go into too much detail, who or what, you know who. It was clear to me, the decision makers, and I said, "Yeah, look, I'm not going to be here tomorrow anyway. Everything's fine there, and you know what's happening." He said, "Take care, my friend, we'll stay in touch." After that, I stopped going. I then called Kadir in Berlin, with whom I already had a good connection. You know, like a good connection, relatively speaking. I called Kadir, reminding him that it's me, the Persian guy. I started to ask if I may.
Can I ask you in between, how long had the change already been going on? You have to say Kadir Padir were with the Bandidos before. Berlin is cleaned up while Helsinki faces extreme pressure. Because of...
Is good, fought a massive war, yes.
So really war, such serious crimes with marauding.
Yes, holiday on the street. How long had the change been going on? That was in that year. So still...
Relatively recent.
Very recent, very recent. They were still in their own phase of finding themselves and were in the process of establishing themselves. And then it was like this. I was there for a short visit at first. I almost forgot about that, and so we were in constant contact. I called him and said, "Listen, buddy, you heard about Lego 81? I said, yeah, and so on. And then I said, I'm at the end of the line here, but I want to stay in the club. I've invested so much time now. I don't want to leave the club, and nothing has happened. Hamburg is a red flag for me by now. I don't feel like dealing with it. It's not going to work." I said, "I'd like to come by your place sometime." He said, "Hey, my man, I won't forget that you have the phone. You know where we are. Come by, best if you come tomorrow." Already tomorrow, something like that. And I had no problem with that. But back then, I still had an S-Class, an S500. I remember it well. Filled it up and drove straight up after the typhoon. Then I was there. Oh, you're already here. Wow, and so on. Yeah, awesome. And he celebrated too. He has changed a lot over time. Back then he was very communicative, very open. He was a real people person back then, a very social guy, you know.
People often forget that while hierarchies and structures of violence exist, they are not the sole factors. As you mentioned earlier, other aspects are also crucial for individuals beyond just these hierarchical systems. You can't run a club or bring a club together if you don't have a certain charisma. You have to have that.
You need to be able to excite people and be likable. If you're an unlikable asshole, it won't work. Then people won't want anything to do with you. You have to be empathetic, have people skills, you have to be able to lead people a little bit.
Be able to intervene.
To succeed, you must understand people, read them, and leverage their strengths and weaknesses to your advantage. That's posing. If you're a good pimp, you can also run a charter. He has a manipulative way about him. With him, we arrived, talked, and he was cool that we were there. And then I was there and thought to myself, we were there for a day or two, really on site. I slept there, it was awesome. That's exactly my thing. To briefly recap, that was an incredibly insightful moment for me back then, albeit a negative one. Awesome, that's fine. The guys are from the street. They're not the super crazy guys with millions, but they're doing their thing. They're local, they're neighborhood guys, and they're here on the spot. All around my age, they also have their reputation, and they're making big waves right now. Kadir, he was also just in his early or late 20s. Maybe at most 30 or late 20s. So, a great clubhouse, just Berlin, lively. There was always something going on 24/7. That's just how it was. This is my movie now, yeah.
It's surprising how different Berlin is from Hamburg when it comes to partying. Berlin has a unique party scene that sets it apart. Yeah.
Of course, because the guys there are totally different. Berlin is a whole different breed. Ultimately, reducing it to criminal offenses is also wrong. But compared to this club life and these club structures, it's worlds apart. Berlin's street scene is entirely distinct from Hamburg's, with individuals on the streets having a different character and demeanor. Hamburg is very distant. There isn't this gang culture there, which is actually a good thing. Still, it exists, but not like in Berlin. In the 90s and 80s, there were a lot of gangs in many districts in Berlin. In the districts, there were gangs, like the 36 Boys and whatever else they were called. And that influenced the youth or the people there in that area.
Shaped them.
Back then, it was district against district. We were from 65 Wedding and 36 Boys Kreuzberg. But can I now? That's why the mindset was different. They were very, very focused on their district and had a different attitude. Very communal back then. They lived a different kind of community. And
that's why it is. But at that time, how old were you then? Or when you moved to Berlin?
At the beginning, towards the middle, early 20s.
Yeah, 23, 24? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, something like that.
Direction, yeah.
Around 22 or 23 at most.
Yeah, I was definitely impressed and looked up to the cardio party and crew.
I was impressed.
That's what I want.
Yes, that's what I want. I said that too. That's exactly what I want. Let's go. Here we go. Where do I sign? That's the idea. And then I stayed there. And that was the starting point for my career with the Hells Angels Berlin City. And then my career in Berlin, and then also...
But we have to, I want to understand that leap a bit more precisely.
You drive.
After meeting a few times and staying in touch, inviting someone over by calling and saying, come by tomorrow, is well received and shows that you value their company. These are the things people pay attention to and appreciate. Like for Villa, he jumps if I say something.
Yes.
Exactly. That's what you find out as president. Who has bite here and who thinks they can just get everything handed to them. Yeah. Okay, but now you're here and you say, yeah, fine. But what do they say to you? You live in Hamburg now and want your money there. Nothing at all. Nothing is said. I am
just there. I already knew how the club works. Nobody had to explain it to me because by that time, I had already internalized the basics of how something like that
works. Was it even clear to you going to Berlin?
No, that just kind of established itself, but it was clear to me I'm on site and I have to be there and I will be there. And of course, I also knew the experience I already had in the months before, or even the year before. So that's the League 81, where you know for sure how the club works and what's a priority and how you present yourself there. And I just stayed there.
And how did you do that? At first I stayed there for 3 weeks straight now.
I had my party in the clubhouse and slept there. Everything went well. I spent every morning and night out with the guys, sleeping and waking up there. Women.
And kids in Hamburg, I was commuting.
Commuted. Left them alone for 3 weeks. Visited. Gave money. Stayed a few days. Returned for the weekend. Always like that, and it went on like that for half a year. Also exhausting.
Right?
Yes, but back then we
Were
younger, fresher, more resilient. And people wanted us. It was fun too. For me, it was cool. Berlin, exciting, yeah, and it's a whole different vibe and cool. The guys had a lot of fun at the beginning. Everything was very easygoing, very relaxed in a way. And the masks came off a bit later. But I'm just describing how it was for me in that moment, and it was just high life, yeah. Departure, takeoff, constant war and ongoing events.
What was the age structure like in that club? How old is Kadir today?
The act is 10, so in 2014 I was 27, he was maybe 32, 31, now he is 40, 41, 42.
So everything fit age-wise? Yes, of course.
We were all relatively all on the same level. Everyone was in their early to mid-20s. In late 20s, it was all around that everyone was about 7 or 8 years apart.
That must have been challenging for some of Helsinki's older starters, no? Yes, of course. Some Helsinki starters reportedly don't accept people under 25 or 30, he said.
He was the youngest president ever. No president was younger. And because of that, and also the way the charter was run, but we'll definitely get back to that later. And naturally, that was far from mere charity, even within the structure itself. But back then, they took a lot of care of Fro, and they also had a lot of supporters within the structure, and of course many who criticized them later on. But at that time, that's how it was. That was the beginning. That was the peak of the charter back then. I reached the peak of the zenith, and for a year we really reached the zenith, and then it went downhill.
We weren't at the zenith for much longer after that.
Mm-hmm. No, it was foreseeable. The way the charter was then managed, and with such vehemence, and with violence that came from the charter, it was obviously destined to fail.
If we talk about the charter again in this part, we briefly touched on it. You can also look it up yourself, the crimes that Kadir and his crew committed as bandidos against the Berlin Hells Angels. Of course, that...
allegedly, a lot of it was never proven.
Allegedly, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. That's very important. So I take it back. There were supposed crimes, so there were crimes. And internally, from what I heard, they were talked about, but not openly discussed exactly. So it was just the
gossip, and
internally it was discussed, but it means there was no conviction or anything like that. Something like that. I'm not accusing anyone either, but of course before that you were on the opposing side, classic rivals, bandidos, Hells Angels, and then there was this switch, especially with this young group. Even we always heard they were hard to lead.
It's young.
Even we were told about it like that. We were also friends with some of them and so on, so rules were manageable and so on. Already difficult. And what was the atmosphere like with the other charters in Berlin? In theory, we're all brothers. That's how you imagine it. Yes, that's
the main label. We're all brothers, among brothers, like she said last time. Yeah, that's of course nonsense. So that's also for the viewers out there. People don't change just because they get some patches. They remain the same with their strengths and weaknesses. And in this case, of course, it's a gathering place for people who are rather lacking in character. That's exactly what I'm saying based on my own experience. I was, of course, one of them too. I was, of course, also the kind of guy who had anything but a positive impact on society. And of course, it's not all brothers. It's a community of convenience that's designed to gain economic advantage, to exercise power, to maintain their gang structure and their... to expand his club structure. The club is designed to expand and to spread its club structure, to expand its business forests. And that almost always involves the use of violence.
May I just once more?
Interrupt? Yes, of course.
Didn't this very desire for expansion by the Bandidos and Hell's Angels actually lead to the structure's suffering? With all the new members, the rapid intake in certain federal states, opening many charters, people coming and going so quickly that it was hardly possible to keep track of it anymore. Didn't this big expansion actually destroy the structures even more?
In hindsight, they took them in, not because they liked them, but because they couldn't avoid them any longer. Specifically, my ex-charter, my former charter, was then, as I said, accused of many crimes. And there was also war, that's a fact. And some things were proven, some were not. During that period, the Hells Angels in Berlin engaged in intense battles, even during the Bandidos era. And accordingly, it got to the point where people said, or let's put it this way, the Hells Angels were pushed so far against the wall that they said, we can't even leave the clubhouse anymore without risking our lives and safety. And then the premise was, they said, we can't lose Berlin, what are we going to do? And then you turn an enemy into a friend. And at that time, it was like this. The Hells Angels, especially the charter I came from, where I was the Bandidos Centro at that time, had a lot of conflicts within the Berlin charters, and Germany also had problems with the nationals. The Bandidos structures are organized differently. Bandidos is a hierarchy, basically a pyramid system. Bandidos is a flat hierarchy. And the Bandidos are very much like a pyramid, meaning they're structured from the top down.
Exactly, you know, Peter.
Max Solik and Les Havel. Whatever. Those were the most influential ones at the time. I'm not sure if they still are. They're definitely structured differently. At the end of the day, that's how it was. You played the Hells Angels into a corner so much that they were knocked out and didn't know how to go on. And the Hells Angels charters back then just weren't war charters. They were long-established older gentlemen, I'll just say older men who did their thing. But they weren't ready for war and were simply too old and didn't have that willingness to use violence. And there was the charter, my former charter, but back then still Bandidos Centro, and they were fully active and also had problems within their own structures, where it almost came to physical confrontations with other charters in Berlin. Internally, though it was still unknown, there was already consideration to switch. The players from Cardi Party have always been very, very close to the Hells Angels, have already sympathized with them, thought the look of the patch was cool, and also knew a few people indirectly and so on. He sympathized a lot. He always insulted me in court as a fan. He was the biggest fan of all, he said so himself.
Back then, I have to shake my head a little at that. So when you're actually with the arch enemy, there are rumors that especially heavy attacks came from his circle, but it still happens somehow. That's really very...
Very sick. Constellation of circumstances, but...
Then it ended. That's just how it was. Then there was...
Background conversation suggested someone wanted to leave, which is a very delicate and difficult situation that requires careful handling. If we don't want to, then that's passed along as well, so it's a razor's edge, something like that. Yet Charter remained unrivaled. Even within Benedus, rebellion against them was impossible.
Who could have done it? Kadir Padir?
Yes, Kadir Padir, the vice president at the time, and Frank Hanabat, and former member of Potsdam, Christopher Rauch, also unanimously known from the hooligan scene back then. And they arranged everything. There were meetings, people talked, and it was agreed to do a patch over, not as prospects, but directly as full Hells Angels members.
Which is very unusual, right?
Of course, usually you always become a prospect charter and have a sponsor charter. In this case, like, you had a sponsor charter, but you still became a member right away. You did a patch over immediately.
What happened after this patch over, we'll discuss in the next part. We're now dealing with a topic
involving the Bandidos.
Mr. Scene is how your journey continues. Kasra, we could really dive deep now. Old memories are resurfacing for me too. We only heard about it in rare cases, including from what others told us. Remember, all eyes were on Berlin. It was a pivotal moment for the people.
I'd also be interested to know what you guys picked up, to hear your bubble from my bubble. Very exciting. I'll ask that in a moment.
But it was really, everyone was looking at Berlin. Back then, there was still the website rockernews.de and so on. People checked it every day. I think you were every other
day. You were...
You were mentioned in newspaper and television articles. People scoured social media as everyone knew something big was happening in Berlin. The change hit like a bomb, and people were excited, wondering what was going on there. Thank you for your story, Thorsten. You're really taking us along. The camera. Thank you, guys, for being with us. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Feel free to comment. Check out Kasra's book. The purser is, of course, linked below. You can order it there. It's a nice thing. You're also supporting Kasra. And otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your time. Kasra. And as always, I remain with an ahoy from the coast.